Hello and welcome back to the Power BI Custom Visuals course, and in this module we'll be looking at the scatter chart by Akvelon. Now the scatter chart by Akvelon is somewhat similar to the native scatter chart, but there's some additional customizations that you have available within inside of the Akvelon version. One of the key things that you're going to find that I happen to really like is the ability to actually select a range of values using a rectangle selection feature that's made available to you. And you can kind of see that on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, you're seeing the darker or the more clear selections or the values. Those are the ones that have been selected. All the ones that are kind of more transparent are the ones that are not selected. So you have the ability to easily select values. And the benefit of this, of course, is if you have other visuals, those other visuals on your report will be filtered by the values that you have selected. So it's a really nice capability. I really enjoy that part of it. Let's actually take a look at how this works together in an example that I've got ready for us right now. All right, so in this example, we're going to start by pulling in some data, and the data that we're going to be using for this example is unemployment data by state. So we'll actually have employment and unemployment data in the same file. So we're going to go up to the Get Data section here and select Excel as our data source, and we're going to choose employment by state as our data source. So we'll go ahead and select that and click Open. Once we've selected that, we should see it appear inside of our field list on the right-hand side. In just a few moments. Actually, we need to go ahead and select the spreadsheet from that the file first. So I'll go ahead and select the spreadsheet here called Rates within inside of the workbook and click Load. Now we should see that data get loaded into our field list on the right-hand side, and we have our data ready to go. So you can see we can see how many people were employed, the percent of employed, the percent of unemployed, and the pure number of unemployed, as well as the state that they are in, and then some grouping that's been added as well. All right, so to use the scatter chart, we of course need to add it into our visualization pane. We can do that by going up to the top ribbon, underneath Customizations, and selecting From Marketplace. When we select From Marketplace, you can search for perhaps the company name, Akvelon, and you'll find all the visuals that they have available to you. Or you can search for scatter chart, and you'll find the specific one that you're looking for. I'm going to show you by searching for the company name, just so you can see the other ones that they have available. They have quite a few of them out here, and a lot of them are very good. I'm going to go ahead and, though, select for this example the scatter chart and hit Add. And that will add the scatter chart into my visualization pane, like so. And we're going to now add that into our design surface, and I'll make it take up about half the screen. Now, before I add anything to that, I'm going to also add in a couple card visuals. The first card that we're going to look at is going to be the unemployment rate. So the unemployment percent we're going to add in here as a card. And I'll make this card come up about here. Now you'll notice that right now it's aggregating the unemployment rate, this is a percent, for all states. So really what we need to do, rather than summing that, we want to take an average of that. So I'll make this into an average, like so. So that's our average unemployment rate for all states. Then I'm going to, and keep that in mind that this is average by state. It's not necessarily the average for the entire country. That would need to be calculated a little bit differently. All right, so we've got that. Now I need to then also bring in, let's say we want to bring in another card. And in this card, I want to see the total number of unemployed individuals. Okay, and we can do some formatting on that if we want. We can make it so that we can actually see the number rather than seeing 13 million in M. We can go into the format section here and, of course, make some modifications to this if we wanted to. Not a big deal for what we're doing in our scenario, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. And, of course, we can add comma separators and things like that. That's really has much less to do with what we're doing today, but just so it's a little easier to view, let's go ahead and do that. All right, now for the main event here, the scatter chart on the left-hand side. We're going to go ahead and select the scatter chart and start to add some different elements to it. Under the detail section, we're going to add in the state. So I'm going to add in the state as the detail. So we should see a dot for each of the states that we're looking at. Next, we'll add in the unemployment, and we'll bring in the number of unemployed underneath the x-axis. And then for the y-axis, we'll bring in the employed. So I'll bring in the employed measure right here and drop that under the y-axis. So we're looking at the hard numbers shown here, and we're going to be able to bring in the percentages as well if we wanted to, or we could just bring the percentages in as part of a tooltip if we wanted. So they have the ability to actually modify purely the tooltip if you want here. We can also bring in the legend. We can bring in our little grouping that we have, and if we drag and drop that into the legend section, we can see that it's going to actually highlight and change the color of each of these. And what's unique about this is all the states are different, right? Each state has different population. So you're going to have some states that have higher total number of unemployed, but they're still considered medium just because they have a lower volume of citizens in that state. So because there's fewer citizens in that particular state, it's considered medium unemployment rate as opposed to the high unemployment rate on some of these other states. So you can see California here is not only high in the pure numbers, but it's also high in the grouping as well. All right, so a few other things we can do here. You can also adjust the size of each of these if you wanted to. So you can bring in another measure. I'm not going to keep this here, but just so you can see what it would look like. You can drag in a measure here and actually have another measure determine the size of each of the dots. You can also have a measure determine the color saturation. So if you wanted the color to vary based on the value that you've placed in here, you can actually use that as well. That's a nice feature as well. Finally, you'll see the tooltip section, which I particularly like because right now we're looking at kind of the pure numbers of unemployed and employed. And I might want to bring the percents. So I can bring in the percents into the tooltip section here. And when I do that, you can see when I hover above any one of these dots, I can not only see the pure numbers, but I can also see the percentages now showing up there. You can see percent employed and percent unemployed now appearing here. All right, now for the main event, one of the things that's really cool about this particular visual is the ability to highlight certain values and select certain values by actually clicking on the chart and dragging your mouse. So by clicking and dragging, you're able to select certain values. Say, for example, I want to grab this little cluster right here. I can grab that like so, and you'll see as you do that, it actually modifies any of the other visuals that you have, or I shouldn't say modifies, but it cross-filters any of the other visuals that you have. So if I wanted to just look at these three particular ones here, I can select those three and see what the unemployment rate would be for those three. If I wanted to look at some of the bottom numbers, I can select those bottom numbers and see how that impacts the card visuals that I have on the screen. Now, there are a lot of customizations that you can then add to the scatter chart by Akvelon. Let's take a look at some of those. You can find that by going underneath the Format Paintbrush over here in the middle of your section on the right-hand side. And you can see things like underneath the Data Color section, you can change the colors that are used for your legend. So you can see high, low, medium can be changed here if I wanted. It's up to you. I'm going to leave them as is. You can also change the settings for the X and Y axes. So underneath the X-axis section, you can do things like change which the starting value is. So where do you want it to start? Right now, we're starting at 0. So you could change that, however, instead of starting at 0 to start at 10 million. If you wanted to kind of vary the chart a little bit, you can kind of adjust some of the things there. In our case, it really makes sense to start at 0 because we have some states that have a particularly low unemployment number, a pure number of people. And so we want to start more of that 0 range so it's more easy to see in the bottom left. You can also change the color of the axes, so you can come in here and change and modify the color that appears in the bottom if you'd like. So you can see that's changed to yellow now. And you can also bump up the text size some. So let me do this. I actually do want to bump up the text size, so I'm going to reset the view to make it more the color it was a few moments ago. And then I'm going to bump up the text size that we have down there in the bottom a little bit so it's a little easier to read. You can also bump up, let's make that more of a, how about a 16-point font? You can also bump up the text size of the title as well, so that's a little easier to read if you prefer. In addition to that, you can change the colors. So I can make this maybe more of a pure black. You saw that a few moments ago, so maybe I make it a pure black instead of the yellow that we had a few moments ago. So that way it's much easier to actually read the values that you have. You can also change the display units. So if you want to see this number all the way spelled out, you can change the display units instead of saying auto, make it none, and you can see the full number appearing there now. So in my case, I might do that. I think I'll leave that as none so I can see that full number kind of displayed here. You can also change things like the style, so you can show the title, just show the units, show both here. You have the ability to kind of define that in here if you'd like. All right. So that's it for, there's a few things in here also. You can turn off the grid lines, which is nice. You can change the line style if you want, or the width of the line. So you can see as I adjust that, the line width gets larger, easier to read. But other than that, I think I'm going to leave those as is. And again, you can do the same thing on the y-axis. You can go down to the y-axis and you can change the color. So I might change both of these to black again and up the font size to 16 so it matches my other axes. And I'll make sure the title is also black. Oop, let's try that again. Also black here so it's easy to read as well. And we'll bump up the font size once more. All right, so very easy to read now. You can, of course, again, modify things with the grid lines if you wanted to. So I could bump up the grid lines a few notches if I wanted to, so it's really easy to read. And you could also, again, change the line style. If you wanted to make it something like dashed, you can do that. I'll leave that as dashed. I kind of like that. All right, now as I go down to the legend section, under the legend section, you can see you can modify the position of the legend. So if you wanted to move this something like to the left, you can do that. If you wanted to move it something like to the bottom center or the left center, you can do that as well. think I'll go ahead and leave that left center. I kind of like it. Yeah, let's make it right center. How about that? There we go. You can change the colors. Again, I like making it more of a pure black so it's much easier to see, and bump up the font size of that so, again, it's easier to see. You can also change the legend name here. So right now it's called grouping. If you wanted to, you can change that in some way. You can leave it as grouping, or you can just outright modify it to be whatever you want. And you can see as you change the text there, it modifies the way it appears inside the chart. All right. You can also change the font family. If you want to use a different font type, you can do that as well. All right, next you see the category label section. Right now, category labels are turned off. If you turn category labels on, you'll now be able to see each state value that you're seeing here. And you can expand the category labels and bump them up a little bit if you wanted to. You can also change the font color if you want to make it a little easier to read. Again, the pure black color is a lot easier to read. And if you wanted to, you can even put a background to those labels. And so you can see now there's a little gray background here. That's useful, especially whenever you have maybe overlapping values, or maybe you have a background color to your report or your chart itself. You can also adjust the transparency of that background if you want, so I can make it darker or lighter so it's easier to see. That's completely up to you, but you kind of get the idea of what you can do with that. All right, as we work our way down a little bit more, you can see the next section here is the constant line. The constant line being our kind of 0 point here. And if you turn on the constant line, you can see that it more strictly defines the constant line that you see on the X and Y axes here. That's up to you whether or not you'd like to see that. You can kind of adjust that if you want. You can change it, and you can change the color as well. I think I'm going to leave those off, though. The point transparency, this has to do with each of the individual points that we have on our screen. If I expand the point transparency, you can see that I can adjust what it looks like when something is selected. So right now, if I select something, you can see there is no transparency to it, but I can actually adjust and increase the transparency whenever something is selected if I wanted to. Okay, so you can kind of adjust this, modify this to whatever you want it to be, and you can see the more I increase this, the more that it becomes transparent when I have something actually selected. I think it probably makes sense to leave that at 0%, but just want to show you that. You can also define what it looks like when there's no selection at all. So the regular transparency, do you want it to be transparent whenever you're not even selecting anything? You can turn that up if you wanted to here. And you can also adjust what it's like when something is not selected. So let's say, for example, I select these 3 points right here. You'll notice that all the points that are not selected are slightly more transparent. You can adjust that some if you wanted to. You can actually make it more transparent, or you can make it less transparent by adjusting this feature here. That's really up to you. I'm going to reset the default, but you know what it does now. Following that, you'll see underneath the shape section here, you can actually increase the shape size. So the size that you see on the left-hand side, you can bump that up some if you want to make it a little clearer or more, larger, I should say. You can bump that up a few notches. I'm going to leave it where it was. And then as you go a little bit further down, you'll see underneath the fill point, if you turn that off, you'll notice that it leaves these as basically hollow points in here. There's no fill color within inside of each of the points on your screen. I'm going to turn that off as well. Just wanted to show you what that looks like. It's nice that you have these settings. You might not necessarily need these settings, but it's nice that you have them. Then finally, underneath the selection color is what happens whenever you do this little drag motion. So notice right now it's kind of the inside of this is this kind of gray color that you see here. You can adjust the selection color to be something like red, and if you do that, notice it makes it into a red box then. So you have the ability to kind of modify that if you'd like. All right, so that's really it for this one. It's a really cool visual. There's a lot of steps that you can change. You don't necessarily have to. But again, one of the big features here is that selection capability and then seeing how it impacts the rest of your report based on the selection. Hope you guys enjoyed this custom visual. I look forward to showing you our next one in our next module. Thanks a lot.